Okay, so let's take a look at the research paper assignment sheet. That sheet looks like this, and you'll notice at the top of the page it says the politics of writing. And I created this title because what I want students to understand is that writing does not happen in a vacuum. We are all products of our environment, and the authors who wrote the stories that you read in week 12 are products of their environment as well. There are things that happened to them personally. There were things that were going on socially, culturally, things that were going on historically, politically. And all of these things were a part of their daily lives. And so these things would have influenced the text that they created. So, for example, here we are living in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. This pandemic is going to influence future writers. Future novelists, future biographers are going to write about this moment, and that is part of that call to write. So at the top of the page it says, for this paper you will research one author and his or her work as well as the author's call to write. So you're going to pick preferably one of those 4 sources listed in week 12. Generally, I give students a little bit more leeway, but because we are sort of limited to this online environment, I would prefer that you pick one of those 4 sources to do your research paper on. Okay, so you'll pick one of those 4. Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been by Joyce Carol Oates, The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, or Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. And you'll explain how that work is a reflection of the author's call to write. Your goal here is to show that literature has real and lasting effects, that it is sort of influenced by society and has an effect on society. So then there's some bullet points. So step number 1 says choose an author to write about, and then read some of the author's writings, poems, short stories. All of you should have read at least one short story by your chosen author. And then you're going to start doing some research. You are going to create an annotated bibliography, and this assignment I believe is worth somewhere between 10 and 15% of your overall grade. I'm not exactly sure on the percentage, but if you're curious, flip over to the syllabus and you should see that listed there. At least a letter grade, perhaps 1.5 letter grades. So in this annotated bibliography, you're going to have 5 sources. One of them will be your primary source, which is like the short story that you've chosen. 2 of them can be internet sources, and we're going to talk more about that later. And then 2 of them will be scholarly sources. So your internet sources might be one sort of call to write source and one biographical source. If you like, for each of the authors in the week 12 module, I've provided at least one call to write source. And if you want to use that source in your research paper, I will allow you to do that. But you're only allowed to use one that I have provided. The rest of the research must be done by you. Okay, so let's continue to look at this research paper. So you'll create a list of sources in your annotated bibliography. You'll construct a thesis statement, and there's some sample thesis statements. We're going to have a whole lesson on constructing thesis statements, so we'll talk more about that next time, but you might want to look at the samples. You'll find evidence from the source itself to support your thesis. And then it says here, remember that you're going to be doing all this research, and you're also going to be you're also going to be citing from your primary source, but still about 70% of the paper should be in your own words. So no more than 30% of the paper should be quoted material. Okay, and then it says some format and conventions, some basic rules. Remember to italicize the titles of complete works like novels, or journal titles, and then to put quotation marks around the short story titles or poem titles or titles of journal articles. There's some information here on citation. It says always write about literature in the present tense. This is something that we've been doing since the poetry explication essay. And it says your paper should be approximately 5 to 7 pages long, including a works cited page. That means your 5th page can be your works cited page, right? The other 4 pages, required pages, must be 4 full pages of written text, paragraphs, okay? It should be in Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced with 1-inch margins, and a heading, your name, my name, course name, and the date. So here it says that this will be due on Friday, May 1st. I'm doing this for all of my classes. That would be the last official day of exam week, but it needs to be posted by 8 a.m. That means I'm going to spend all day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, grading for all 7 of my classes. I'm required to have grades in Monday morning, so I cannot extend the deadline any longer than that. If you get it done ahead of that deadline, and it's good quality work, please go ahead and post it so that I can get ahead on that. All right, below this, it says below is an outline you should follow for constructing your essay. And here you'll see that outline. This is a very specific outline. You'll have an introduction, and there's some review notes on introductions. We've already talked about introductions when we did the poetry explication essay. Below that, you'll have a biography paragraph on your author. Notice that it says if the author has a lot of professional work, you might even want to create 2 paragraphs. So you might have one biography paragraph on the author's personal life and one biography paragraph on the author's professional life, but you're only required to have one biography paragraph altogether. Then you'll have one paragraph on the author's call to write. So what's going on in and around the author when they write this text. So you might even want to use, if you're doing Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, you might want to use one of those articles that I provided on Poe and Thomas Dunn English, or the other one, Poe and Rufus Griswold. If you're doing yours on the yellow wallpaper, you might use why I wrote the yellow wallpaper to help construct this paragraph, the author's call to write paragraph. Then the next paragraph, the third body paragraph, will be a summary of your primary source, a summary of the short story. That will be followed by an analysis paragraph, actually at least 2 analysis paragraphs, in which you pull evidence from the text to support your argument. So let's say that, for example, Poe's call to write was this feud that he was having with Thomas Dunn English, and that his goal in writing this text was basically to get revenge on all of the critics of his work. So one example or one piece of evidence from the text might be the characterization of Fortunato, the way in which Fortunato is dressed like and acts like a fool. So I might use that in my analysis paragraph using that text paragraph organization, right? So here it sort of outlines that text paragraph organization. Again, something that we have practiced extensively. And then the last body paragraph will be like the public's reaction to the text. How did the public initially react to the text? How did they feel about this work? And then how do people feel about it today? So, for example, again, if we're talking about Poe, for example, he wasn't especially popular in his time period. That particular story was originally published in one of the ladies' home journals, which was kind of interesting to think that he wrote it for an audience of women. And by and large, his work was sort of not necessarily ignored by the public, but wasn't necessarily really popular with the public. And it wasn't until after Rufus Griswold's really harsh biography of him that he became so well known. And now this story, The Cask of Amontillado, is one that is regularly read by high school and college students. And then you'll have a conclusion, and there's some information on that. And then, of course, you'll have a works cited page with your citations. We'll talk more about how to create that later on. Notice this information in red. Each paragraph should be roughly 1/2 page. This will give you 4 full pages of text. So I've outlined 6 body paragraphs plus introduction and conclusion. That's 8 paragraphs. If each paragraph is 1/2 a page, that will give you 4 full pages of text plus a works cited page, and that will make sure that you meet the 5-page length requirement. If for some reason you cannot meet the 5-page length requirement with 4 full pages of text, then you'll add an extra analysis paragraph. Find one more example from the short story to help support the argument that you're trying to make. I real quickly want to switch over now and look at the sample research paper. A copy of this is provided in the week 13 module. So it looks like this. Notice that it is in Times New Roman 12-point font. There's a heading, student name, my name, course name, date, and then a title. This student did theirs on The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, and it was a really interesting article. The student got an A. Interesting essay, I mean. The very first paragraph has an introduction and then ends with a thesis. Dr. Seuss published The Lorax in 1971, a year after the Environmental Protection Agency began to argue against the destruction of the environment. So here he tells you what sort of argument the author is trying to make and provides the call to write. as well as information on the topic, in this case, the primary text, the Lorax and Dr. Seuss. The paragraph directly after his introduction is a biography paragraph. So this tells you a little bit about Dr. Seuss and his life. Notice the author's use of parenthetical citation. You might want to take another look at this a little bit more closely later on. The paragraph directly following that is a call to write paragraph, talking about specifically what influenced the author to write this particular text, including the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, which was something that the student mentioned in his thesis. Following that is a one-paragraph summary of the primary text, one-paragraph summary of the Lorax. Following that is an analysis paragraph using text paragraph organization, where the author finds evidence in the primary text to support his argument about what he thinks the author is trying to do with this particular text at this particular time. That's followed by a second analysis paragraph, and then a public's reaction paragraph. This is the last body paragraph. How did the public react? It was rather positive at first. He talks a little bit also too about how contemporary people are using the text, the fact that the children's book was then made into a movie, for example. And then last but not least, the student has a conclusion. Okay. And then at the very end of the document is a works cited page. Again, we're going to talk more closely about how to create a works cited page. Okay. I'm going to actually walk you through this process once you complete your annotated bibliography. But you notice all of his paragraphs are at least a half a page long. So he has at least 4 full pages of text. His actually goes on to, I think, onto the 5th page. And then he has that separate works cited page. Okay. And you will do something very similar. So take a second to read this sample. It will give you a good idea of what you're working towards here in the future.